So welcome, Allison.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you have a really interesting journey in the self-love. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, so when I was young, I think even like elementary school age is when I can first remember feeling kind of second guessing my body and my body image. And I will say right off the bat that I don't even know what words you would use. I was a quote unquote normal sized child. Um, I never had anyone say anything negatively to me about my body, or like never went to the pediatrician and was told to lose weight or anything like that. But I did grow up with my mother, who I love dearly, but she was a chronic dieter. She woke up every morning and had a notebook at her table and would write down, she would weigh herself daily and write her weight down. And there was just so much diet behavior. So the only connection that I can make is that I was picking up on it as a child. Um, and then, I even remember being in elementary school and looking at some of the other girls in my class, like, and then kind of, I remember distinctly in gym class, we had like a gymnastics unit. And I remember like being on my knees, looking at the back of my calves and looking at another girl's calves and seeing how slim they were. And my calves to this day, I just have very built up calves. But as a child, I looked at them and thought, oh, like just negative, like that's bad. Why are they so big? I remember thinking that. And and then I basically was teased a little bit on and off as a child. And I don't want anyone to feel bad for me because I also was a child who teased other kids too. So I not only was teased, I was a teaser and a bullier, but it was always over my nose, the size of my nose. And kids would call me Miss Piggy and snort at me and make fun of me. And so fast forward to high school, um, I was in private school from like nursery until eighth grade, and then my parents decided no more private school, and I went to public high school, this big high school. I was lost. I had a really rough year freshman year. I was teased. I was kind of singled out a lot, and I couldn't do anything about the size of my nose, so I turned to my body and I developed an eating disorder in high school. And I lost a lot of weight. And I just, I want to say at some point around my senior year of high school, it's blurry now, but maybe it was the end of my junior year into my senior year, I did start seeing a therapist and worked on it, went away to college. And that was the first time I like escaped my town. I went away to a school. I'm from New York, so I went away to a school 6 hours north. And all of the eating stuff kind of fell away. It was weird. It was like I was suddenly free and just, nobody knew who I was. When you go away to college, it's like a fresh start, and the eating stuff went away. However, it did come back in my 20s after I graduated college. And I am a registered dietitian. When I went to college, I did not go for nutrition. I actually got a communications degree. I worked in public relations for a few years, 5 years, until this pull, this desire to go to school for nutrition came over me. Because I did initially, when I registered for colleges, I did want to go for nutrition. So sorry, I'm a little all over the place right now. I did want to go for nutrition because I was so obsessed as a high school student with the eating disorder. I became very obsessed with food and nutrition. So I did apply to all the colleges that had nutrition programs. But once I got to college, I changed my mind. Because, what are you, 18, 19 years old when you start? And I was like, I can't, all that science. And I was like, I can't do this right now. Forget it. And I decided to do communications instead. So, and I also in college gained a bit of weight, did the typical college thing, drinking a lot of beer, eating a lot of crappy food and whatever. And when I graduated college, I was like, you know what, I need to get this weight off of me. And I did Weight Watchers. And I wasn't really disordered about it. It was, I don't know how to say it. It was just, I did what I followed the points and whatever. I mean, this was so long ago because I'm now in my early 40s. Um, and I didn't get too obsessive over it. But when I stopped working in PR and decided to go back to school for nutrition, I remember being a nutrition undergrad and starting to learn. There's a lot of diet culture, diet talk embedded in the nutrition undergrad program. And I remember starting to second guess myself. And there was one project that I had to do in one of my classes where you keep like a food diary and you write down everything you eat and you track your calories. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, like looking at what I was eating and the amount of calories and learning so much about calories and all the macronutrients. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I eat so much. And that eating disorder voice from way back when in high school was slowly coming out. So you can stop me if I'm talking too
Oh
much.
no, not at
um,
all.
so it's funny because I haven't told this story like from beginning to end. Uh, like I haven't, I always like drop little bits of it in my podcast or in my Facebook group or when I'm working with clients, but I've never actually like told the story like this. So, um, okay. So anyway, I also, as a nutrition student, started working at a personal training gym as a quote unquote nutritionist, even though I wasn't a full like registered dietitian at the time. It was a personal training gym, and I was helping people with nutrition counseling, which basically meant I was helping people to lose weight. And one of the managers, one of the owners of the personal training gym said to me, he said, oh, you should try our nutrition program that you're working with the clients on this. You should do it too. You'll be ripped. I don't remember the exact language that he used. And at the time, I really didn't think there was anything wrong with me. Like, I guess I always had that little back from having an eating disorder in high school. Like, I always kind of was like, oh, like being careful and watching myself. But again, not obsessive at that point. So here I am now, a nutrition undergrad, working at this gym. And as soon as he said that to me, it was like a switch went off. And I completely went down that path of disordered eating like 150%. I was like, all of a sudden, his words made me think like, oh, something's wrong with me. I need to change myself. I thought like I always was an exerciser, a healthy eater. I felt fine, but then I knew that I suddenly felt like I needed to change things. And so I started totally tracking, and we didn't have like, I'm trying to think what year this was. This is before there were like food diary apps, and this is even before iPhones. So I was writing everything down and I became completely obsessive, lost a lot of weight. I was in my mid to late 20s at this point. Lost my period. I had lost my period in high school when I had an eating disorder, lost my period again. I was married at this point. My husband and I were thinking of starting having kids, but I basically went off birth control pill and my period was missing for a year. So, but I was in denial. I was in denial that I thought that it had something to do with me having been on the birth control pill for so many years. I was totally in denial that it had anything to do with the fact that I wasn't eating enough. I was exercising like crazy and that there was some sort of an issue. Um, and so I'm trying to remember. I did end up, as far as like getting pregnant, I went to like fertility doctors. I was still in denial about the fact that it was my eating and my exercise. And fast forward, I was finally able to get pregnant, had my son, who is now 10 years old. And then I got pregnant again a couple of years later, both times using a fertility doctor because both times I had trouble. I had trouble getting pregnant and needed to go the fertility route. And when I had my second son, a lot of well, let me go back. When I had my first son, when I finally did get pregnant, a lot of that disorderedness that kind of cropped up again in my 20s, my late 20s, sort of fell away. I was really excited to be pregnant, and I kind of embraced everything that was happening with my body. I don't really remember when I was pregnant with my first son feeling bad about myself and my body. But when I got pregnant with my second son, all of those disordered thoughts came back again. Like I worked out through both pregnancies, but through in the second one, I just remember feeling like I can't wait until I have this baby and I can get my body back. Like I was very fixated and obsessive. And that's exactly what I did. Like as soon as I had my second son, who is now almost 8, um, the disordered eating came back full force again. I lost a ton of weight. My period was all out of whack, and I was depressed. I was not present with my children at all. Like my mind, all I cared about was when am I going to work out? When am I eating? What am I eating? It was 24/7, nonstop. Um, and it wasn't until several years later that I realized I needed to fix myself. Now, mind you, I was working as an adjunct professor teaching undergrad nutrition. I was also having my own business doing nutrition counseling. And again, most people were coming to me for weight loss. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I just remember I was like, I cannot work with another person on weight loss. I'm going to scream. And then I also knew I needed to do work on myself. And so I found intuitive eating, which for your listeners, if they don't know what intuitive eating is, it first came about as a book written by Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribole, who are both registered dietitians. And I believe it was first published in 1995. And I had heard of it a long, long time ago when I was a nutrition undergrad, actually. And I remember I thought, oh, that sounds like a really nice idea, a nice concept, like to listen to your body and eat when you're hungry and stop when you're satisfied. But I was just kind of like, yeah, that's not for me or whatever. But when a few years ago, when I realized that I was really suffering and I couldn't function as a mother and I couldn't deal with the obsessiveness over my own body anymore, I decided to really look into this intuitive eating. Um, I started doing the work myself, and then I found a therapist who also happened to be a certified intuitive eating counselor. So I started working with her in addition to the work I was doing on my own. Um, and then I decided as a dietitian, there was a period in time where I thought I didn't even want to be a dietitian anymore because I didn't want to talk to people about food. I didn't want my career to be about it. But then I saw that dietitians could become certified intuitive eating counselors. And through working with Evelyn Tribole, one of the authors of the book, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. If I'm going to continue working as a dietitian, I want to work as an intuitive eating coach, counselor. And that's exactly what I did. I'm trying to think, it was the summer of 2018 when I took this course with with Evelyn Tribole, and I just kind of went from there. And even when I took the course, I wasn't sure if I wanted to work with people yet with it. But registered dietitians have to do 75 continuing ed credits every 5 years. So I was just like, I needed some continuing ed credits. I was very interested in the topic. And so it wasn't until, I don't know, a few months later that I decided I'll take this certification and work with people. And so just this past September of 2019, I sort of reopened up shop, and that's what I do now. I work with people, mostly women, with on intuitive eating. I have an intuitive eating program. I work with people one-on-one privately, but I also just started this month a group program where I work with people in a small group type setting, all online. It was online before all of this craziness started, but now it's definitely online. And so that's kind of like the abbreviated version of my life from high school to how I got to what I'm doing now and where I am today.
I love that. So I have a whole bunch of questions for you.
Yeah, go for it.
um, so you went when you changed into dietitian and
Hmm.
having a little bit of, I'm an integrative nutrition coach. That's what I'm certified in. And I know that background between the dietitian and that integrative or the intuitive approach is so different. Can you tell us a little bit about like the differences and the things that you're bringing into your dietitian practice from that intuitive eating practice?
Like, in other words, what I'm bringing, the pieces that I'm bringing from my
Yeah,
nutrition
because
background.
they're so different. Like the dietitian, a lot of us have been to the dietitian or our doctors have sent us to
Mhm,
dietitians, and it's so focused on, like you said, that weight focus or the BMI. When you bring in that intuitive portion,
mhm.
how are you like blending those two together, because they are so contradictory?
Yeah, no, I will tell you that I am basically very focused on people healing their relationship with food and their body. So I'm going to be perfectly honest, a lot of what I learned as a nutrition student has kind of dropped to the side. Now, that being said, I do have an understanding of the way the body works. Um, that we have when you go to school to become a dietitian, you have to go through all the sciences, the chemistry, the biology. So I have an understanding of metabolism, the way vitamins and nutrients work in the body, and I still wholeheartedly believe in all of that. And I bring that into the work that I do with my clients, especially if I have, like, I haven't had a diabetic client, but I've had some clients who are like pre-diabetic, have a family history of diabetes. And so I will bring in my medical nutrition training to help them. But the parts that I leave out is if you go to, I guess, a regular dietitian who really isn't in the anti-diet intuitive eating space, and you are pre-diabetic and you're afraid that you are going to become diabetic because you have a family history, they will probably first tell you to lose weight. And they'll look at your weight. I don't do that. I will say, instead of let's focus on what foods can we take out of the diet and getting you on a scale and trying to lose weight, let's focus on what foods we can bring into your diet. What can we add that can make things healthy? And what other things can we do? Maybe if my client isn't really exercising, I try to work out, well, what types of movement might be enjoyable for you? Because I do firmly believe that exercise is very important, but I try to make a person look at it from a point of not doing it for the sake of trying to lose weight and getting to and shrinking their body. So I do take the medical nutrition therapy pieces that I've learned in school and weave it in. But anything I learned about like BMI, to me, I don't even talk about it. I never ask a person when I work with them what they weigh. Whereas a few years ago when I was still doing weight loss, those would be like the top questions, like what's your weight? What weight goal do you have? Like, I don't do any of that. And then in intuitive eating, there's 10 principles, and the very last principle is the nutrition piece. So I feel like a lot of the work you do up to that point is more of the emotional piece, and just trying to peel back the layers of how you got to this place that you're at right now with feeling bad about your body or feeling like you need to lose weight. So it's really like a lot of therapy, as I'm sure you're aware. And then the very last principle is nutrition, and that's where I'll talk about the macronutrients and how we can make this a healthy balance, but without getting like obsessive and making it weight focused. If that answers your question.
It does. And you mentioned because you mentioned two things, and I want to know if they're different. You mentioned disordered eating, and then you also said it as eating disorder. Are those two separate things, and are those
Yes.
things that fold into the intuitive eating?
Yeah, so they definitely are two different things. An eating disorder is something that would need to be diagnosed using the DSM-5, and you would, like, for instance, anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder. There's actually more eating disorders, but those are like the top three right now. And you have to meet certain criteria in order to be diagnosed having an eating disorder. Disordered eating, it's so, disordered eating, I would say, is where you might have a lot of behaviors that, let's say, like a person with anorexia has. However, you do not meet all of the criteria set forth in the DSM-5 to be considered with a diagnosis of anorexia nervosa. And unfortunately, I feel like disordered eating, a lot of us have. Like anyone who has been chronically dieting, and just placing such an emphasis on wanting to shrink their body shape and size, more than likely is suffering from some form of disordered eating. So there, and unfortunately, in the society that we're living in, disordered eating is like normalized. Like you hear a person doing something like, let's say, a cleanse, or just even a highly restrictive diet, and all those behaviors are very similar to somebody with a full-blown eating disorder. But it's just so normalized in this society to be that way. And it's like, oh, you're trying to lose weight. Yeah, you're eating like, barely any food, but we understand you want to lose weight, so that's normal. So yes, there is definitely a difference between a clinical eating disorder and having disordered eating, even though they sound so similar.
Right. And with both of them, you mentioned that you lost your period, so hormonal fluctuations. Mm-hmm. With both of those disorders or disordered eating, do those come to the forefront from both of them?
The missing period, or
missing periods, messed up hormones, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are people who, I'll give you an example. When 3 times in my life, I lost my period for a long period of time. So the first time was in high school, and it was around a year. The amount of weight that I lost, if you looked at me, and without saying any numbers or anything, but if you looked at me and if you looked at what my weight was when I lost so much weight, and if you put me on a BMI chart, I was actually I was not at the underweight category. I was at the very low end of normal. So if I had gone to a doctor, like my pediatrician, I guess you still go to a pediatrician in high school, right? I think you do.
Yeah.
Like if I had gone, he would have not seen anything wrong with me or ever said like, oh, you have anorexia. But I had a missing period, which is basically saying your body is not functioning properly if your period is gone for a few months, a year, whatever it is. So I don't know if I think I might have lost track of your question, but like you can have a lot of symptoms of a full-blown eating disorder, even though you might not meet the criteria for a full-blown eating disorder. Because when I had an eating disorder in high school, it was restricting, binging, laxative abuse. And so pretty much I was considered bulimic, and that's what I was going to therapy for. But when that disorderedness came back in my 20s and again in my 30s, I don't know that I really would have met all of the criteria to have an eating disorder, but I definitely had hormonal disruption just from the fact that I had a missing period and I couldn't get pregnant. So yeah, I mean, and that's part of the problem, is that there's a lot of people who are suffering and having physical effects from what's going on, but they're not necessarily being treated or seen as an anorexic, a bulimic, etc.
So in your practice that you have now, those are the types of things that you're helping people with, is healing that relationship with self and food, correct?
Yeah, I'm mostly working. I do not right now have any clients with full-blown eating disorders. I might have some who had an eating disorder in the past and then have been dealing with disordered eating. I will say that with intuitive eating, one thing that the authors of the book emphasize is if somebody is in the midst of an eating disorder, it is really hard. It can be very hard to try and work through the principles of intuitive eating. And I'll just give you an example. Like if somebody is right now has an active eating disorder of, like, let's say anorexia, it's going to be very hard for that person to try and work on getting in touch with their hunger and getting in touch with their satiety, because they are have been restricting so heavily, and it is completely thrown off any sense of hunger and satiety. So there's a lot of work for someone with a full-blown eating disorder to do before they can actually start working on intuitive eating. So that's why a lot of times I emphasize the type of clients that I see would either be people who are dealing with chronic dieting, the restrict binge cycle, and disordered eating. But if someone comes to me who still has a very active eating disorder, I usually say, I would like to see that person working with a medical doctor, a therapist first, and make some progress that way before I can start working with them on intuitive eating.
So in the intuitive eating like practice that you have, what is the first thing when you do find that ideal client that you dive into with them?
The first thing I do is we work on the very first principle of intuitive eating, which is reject the diet mentality. So I find,
I'm
yes,
cheering.
a lot of people, some people who come to me have already read the book and have been doing some of the work on their own. Others who come to me just kind of have heard about intuitive eating. They don't really know what it is. And they are they're almost coming to me and hoping, they still have that hope that maybe they can lose some weight, and that's totally normal. I was the same way, and it's completely, I would say about 98% of my clients still have that hope, but they have the hope, but they also know that dieting and restricting and everything they've done in the past has not worked for them, and is leading to a lot of mental stress and anxiety around food. So the first thing I work on with my clients is getting them out of that diet mentality. Maybe maybe they might not be actively dieting, but they're still following a lot of food rules. They could be thinking like, oh no, I shouldn't be eating carbs, or, they've got a laundry list of foods that they can't eat. They're forbidden foods. So that's the first thing we do, is we try to figure out what diet tools are you still holding on to? What diet tools are you ready to start getting rid of, such as a food diary app, or weighing and measuring foods if I have a person who does that. And it can be scary for people to get rid of that. So if someone has like 10 diet tools that they're still using, I will say to them, let's try and get rid of one this week. Let's just focus on one. You don't want to overwhelm yourself. But if we can focus on one, let's do that. One this week, and then next week we'll focus on another one. And we work on, their history growing up, and where the dieting even came from, where it started, and just really trying to get rid of that diet mentality. That's the first step, because if you can't start working on that, it's kind of hard to move forward with all of the other steps. I'll call them steps or principles, the 10 principles of intuitive eating. They are not, I always tell people, they're not rules, because this is not a diet. We're not following a rigid set of rules, but rejecting the diet mentality is the number one thing.
And with society nowadays and the diet mentality being thrown in our face from every different area, I mean, there's not a place you can turn that diet industry has not sucked us in some way. How do you suggest, when they are moving through that, to kind of quiet that noise?
It's funny. I just actually had one of my sessions with my group yesterday, and one of the things I said is, first of all, so many of us are on social media. So if you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, and back in the day when you were dieting, just to start by unfollowing any of those social media influencers who are, pushing a diet or pushing some hardcore workout. Just unfollow those people. Also, if you're friends with people on Facebook who might be Gosh, I remember, it's not as popular now, but I don't know if you're familiar with like the Beachbody workouts.
Former
um,
coach,
oh, okay.
former
There you
Beachbody
go.
coach.
I almost became one, but then I was like, I can't do. I'm like, I'm not pushing stuff on people, so I never did. I love the workouts. Again, I love exercise. I do it for different reasons than I did when I was disordered. But yeah, so like I remember there were people who were. I'm friends with people who on Facebook who were coaches, and they were. So I didn't necessarily defriend them, but I started hiding their. I think it's a different. Yeah, I didn't defriend, like get rid of them, but I just hid their posts because I couldn't look at that kind of thing. It would be it's very triggering to see those things. So that's the first thing. And then I tell people who I follow on social media, anti-diet influencers, and they could be coaches, they could be dietitians who are anti-diet, therapists, whatever. Follow those people. The more you surround yourself with those anti-diet messages, the more you can drown out all of that diet noise. The other big thing is looking at your friends and your family. And this can be a tough one because this isn't social media. This isn't like getting on the computer and seeing these people throwing things at your face. This is like your family, your friends. And some of them can be very, very um, into dieting and into weight loss and doing the latest thing. And the one thing I say is, if you can, to try, if it's someone who you're close with and it's a person who has a lot of meaning in your life, to try and have a conversation with them and let them know what you're doing, that you're trying to move away from all of that, that you're trying to heal your relationship with food and your body, you're working on intuitive eating, and just that talking about diets in general can be really triggering for you. And if it's someone who is a really good friend and just a family member who cares, I have a feeling that even though they may still want to do what they're doing, they'll listen to you and be respectful of what you're trying to accomplish.
You mentioned to follow the people that have the anti-diet message. You have that kind of a community where if people wanted to follow you, where could they find you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm on Instagram. It's at Alison Barkman RD, and Allison's spelled with one L. I also, a few months ago, started a Facebook group, and it's called the Intuitive Eating and Body Compassion Community. It's a growing group, and it's basically a support group. I'm in there pretty much daily. I moderate it to make sure people are following the rules. No one's posting anything that's triggering. I'm always asking questions. I'm commenting on other people's posts. So again, it's just a supportive place for people to get anti-diet information and intuitive eating support. And then I have my podcast, which is Speaking of Hungry. And that's another free resource that I offer to people. Anyone can listen. I'm in there doing episodes on my own, although a lot of the most recent episodes have been interviews like this one, where I'm interviewing all sorts of people, dietitians, therapists, coaches, really anyone who works in this anti-diet space. Uh, and then there's my website, which is AlisonBarkman.com. That's just sort of where people can find out more about me. But really, if you want to follow me, it's more in my Facebook intuitive eating group, and on Instagram, and my podcast.
And I'll make sure to get those in the notes. I just wanted to make sure that people knew that you
Yeah.
were a resource also if they are struggling with this food, basically relationship with yourself and food.
Yes.
I love what you're doing and how you've blended the science and the intuitive eating together. I just found that book like 2 months ago and it's like changed my life. I was like, oh, oh boy, I'm surprised that no one's ever put me in a category before. But
Yeah.
so speaking of your group and everything like that, what kind of things, like that you said there's support, is it a lot of like, here's recipes, or is it more of that support through finding the love for yourself?
Finding the love for yourself. There hasn't really, I'm trying to think, I don't think there's been anyone posting recipes. But it's really, what I love about the work that I do is there are some people, like you just said, you just discovered the book a couple months ago. There are some people who never knew that they don't have to be dieting and they don't have to be in this constant pursuit to change their body. And when they hear about this anti-diet intuitive eating stuff, they're like, what? Like, what? So there's a mix of people in the group. There are people in the group who have heard of this stuff before, and they're just trying to find more support groups to join. And there are other people who are like, I didn't even know anything about this, and I am so sick of trying to change myself and following rules and being rigid and structured, and I am so ready to let all of this go. So I will go in there and like post a question, or just post a question to get people thinking and sharing. But what I love about the group is there are a lot of members in there who are like, oh my gosh, like last night I totally had a binge for a first time in a while, and I don't understand what happened or what triggered it, and I'm feeling really upset about this. And then you'll see just other people coming out and supporting that woman to be like, don't be so hard on yourself. It happens. Because recovery is never this straight line, like you're going from point A to point B. It's all over the place. There's a messy middle that a lot of people don't talk about either. You always hear a lot like, oh, I'm recovered now, it's great. But we need to hear more about that messy middle and what it took to get there. And it's not easy. And that's what this group is all about, is people hitting these speed bumps, these roadblocks, and they need help. And they come to the group and ask for support. And I have to say, I just love the way everyone's supporting each other, and people are not really, no one's really talking about dieting or body bashing or anything like that. It's been really wonderful.
I love that it's based on love. And that
Yes.
is such an important thing. I know for me I'm going to say not recovery, because I'm still working on it, like you said, every day, anything can be triggering. There's
Yes.
like, I had one of my family members mention like the point value, because they're still on Weight Watchers, the point
Mm.
value of a food. And it was like, I went into this massive shame spiral and started like, oh, maybe I should go back to Weight Watch. And it was like one of those, I had to catch myself. And if I had the support of your community, I don't think it would have lasted for 2 days. It would have been like, oh, here's this support. It's so beautiful that you've built that community.
What you just said is so true. It's like you need to get out of your own head. So, some of us are privileged enough to be able to go to therapists and afford that luxury. Not everyone is. And to be able to go to a support group either live and in person, which, right now with everything that's going on in the world is not happening, but also just where we are, even before coronavirus, where we are with just using social media, it's nice to be able to go and to say something like, oh, I was just totally triggered by a family member who's doing points, and you start to think like, oh, maybe I should be doing that. And now you have this group to go to and have people be like, no, you don't need to be doing that at all.
So with anti-diet, I know for me that was hard for me to grasp, because I'm like, well, you're always eating. You're always having to feed yourself. Isn't that a diet? Like, what's the difference between anti-diet and like actually intuitively eating? And I feel there's this like blurred line between when you hear anti-diet, you're like, I don't have any restrictions. Whereas
Yeah, so I think when a lot of people hear about anti-diet and intuitive eating, well, some people interpret it as just having a free-for-all and not, it's like, oh, you can just eat all the pizza and Oreo cookies you want. It doesn't matter. But that's not being intuitive either. It's about not having food rules. If you're craving, I always use this example because this is something that I used myself. Like, it's like you're going out to lunch with your friends and you're looking at a menu and you see this chicken salad sandwich and you're like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. But I can't even think about how fattening that probably is. So I'm going to eat the salad with grilled chicken instead. It's about eating what you really want, what you're craving, because most of the time, if we end up denying ourselves what we really want, that will end up down the road leading to overeating and binging. Or like moms out there here's another example. Like, how many times have I been to like a kiddie birthday party and you smell the pizza and you're like, oh my God, that smells so good. But nope, like I'm not eating it, only to later down the road end up binging on pizza because you did not allow yourself to eat it because of whatever food rules are floating around in your head that pizza is bad. So anti-diet basically means you're not going to restrict anymore. You're not going to follow food rules anymore. However, being intuitive is also about eating foods that make you feel good and healthy. So going off, just flying off the handle and having a free for all is also not going to make you feel good. Binges don't make people feel good. So you are keeping your health in mind. It's a healthy balance. Instead of using words like bad foods and forbidden foods, I like to use the word play foods. No, of course we can't be eating pizza and ice cream and Oreo cookies all day long every day as our, daily staple of a diet. But if those are foods that you love, there has to be a way to fit them in every day if you want to. There has to be. Otherwise, you are going to end up obsessing about those foods and overeating or binging on them. So I don't know if that like
Totally
clears it up
answers
or
it
okay.
does for me. It's that obsessive, like that I can't have, so what do you want?
Right.
Then like you said, you go for that binge, like, oh, I just ate that entire large pizza. Whereas if you would have allowed and listened to your cravings in the beginning, you may have had one piece or even a half a piece and been like,
Yeah.
I'm satisfied.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick example. I've had a few clients, like I had one client and her thing was the Girl Scout cookies. And as we were working together week after week, my when I work with people one-on-one, it's an 8-week program. So as we were like going week by week, she was telling me that at her desk where she works, she's like, Allison, I have the cookies on my desk. And she's like, it is amazing. I take a few, take a couple. She's like, but that box has been on my desk for like a couple of weeks, whereas in the past, it would have been gone. Because you start it's almost like what I love to use the example of Thanksgiving Day. Like all of us, we get so excited for Thanksgiving Day. We're eating all these foods that we don't normally eat. We eat a lot. We feel like really stuffed afterwards. Maybe the next day we have some leftovers and we're still like, yay, like stuffing and I don't know, whatever else, sweet potato pie. By the third day, we're just over it. Like we don't want we're like, okay, no more sweet potato pie, no more pumpkin pie. That's because we've exposed ourselves to it and we allowed ourselves to eat the food and we're just kind of like, we're done. We're over it. Like we're not looking to eat pumpkin pie every day for the next month. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what happens with intuitive eating when you start giving yourself permission to eat different foods. It doesn't, there's not this like halo of like, oh my God, I can only eat it now, like that Last Supper mentality. Like, this is the only time I'm going to be able to have it because for the next month, I'm not allowing myself. When you think that way, you are going to eat large volumes of whatever that food is.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. And it's also about being in touch with yourself, which is a big part of, like you said, with the intuitive eating. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay, am I satisfied? What do
Yeah.
I want? And I don't know if you use some of the like therapy, mental health parts of it, of like, well, why am I wanting this?
Absolutely. And I know I'm not a therapist. I wasn't trained as a
Yeah.
therapist. I'm a dietitian, but that's part of what you learn in the intuitive eating certification. Yeah, I mean, you have to kind of dig deep and figure out, well, what's driving all of, like, if you're a restrictor, what's driving you to restrict? What is this really all about? If you're an emotional eater, what's driving? Why are you turning to food as a coping mechanism and not using other strategies to cope? And emotional eating, it's perfectly fine every once in a while to be angry, be upset, and turn to, let's say, a bowl of ice cream. But when that becomes problematic is when you're always turning to food and you're not turning to other coping mechanisms like going for a walk, using a therapist, whatever the case may be.
That's awesome. And it is true. Like for me, like I said, with my family member, it's so easy to get triggered back into those unhealthy patterns. And at that point you lose touch with your actual self and your body. It becomes just like a pattern.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I think even people who are recovered and practically fully healed. Listen, I'm one of them. Every once in a while, that voice will come in my head because my eating disorder and disordered eating, I might be recovered, but it's going to be with me for the rest of my life. So I would be foolish to think that those thoughts are not going to pop into my head. But what the difference is, and maybe you found this with yourself, is how are you handling it now? Are you reacting and then engaging in those behaviors again? Or are you just kind of like, oh, I just had that thought. I felt a little triggered, but I know if I go down that path where it's going to lead me and it's just not worth it. And just kind of like digging yourself out of that.
And it's a lot of work. And I personally would have never been able to do it alone. The harder I tried alone, the worse it got. So
Yeah.
that the community that you have and what you're doing is so special and so needed right now to kind of pull through this huge diet culture that is everywhere. So I'm so excited for your work and excited that you were here to share this, because again, it's just nice to hear that body positive, anti-diet, intuitive eating message.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to do it. I'm so passionate about it. So the more I can help people, the better, for sure.
So my all-time favorite question for all the podcast guests is, if people only walked away with one thing, if a lady walked away with one nugget, what would that one thing be that you'd want her to walk away with?
I think I'm going to say there's a spinning instructor. Um, I'll come right out and say it. I have a Peloton, and I totally like, I use exercise as an outlet for stress. And there's one very body positive anti-diet instructor, and she always says, like, you are bigger than a smaller pair of jeans. And it makes me think, like, I've been on that bike hearing her say it, and I'm just like, it's so true. Like, there are other things in life to strive for. And when you stop placing such an emphasis on trying to make yourself smaller, it opens your life up to do so much more. It is amazing the things that will come out of you. Like, if you're a creative person and you've kind of squashed all of that because you've been spending so much of your life trying to shrink your body, it's just amazing that when you stop worrying about fitting your body into a smaller pair of pants or whatever, making that your goal, things will open up in your life and you will just be able to do so many other things with your mind, with your body. And it's just amazing. And I guess I can't really explain what it's like until you get there. But it's just such a nicer way to live. It really is.
And the amount of time you get back from your life, you will learn to do so many more things. That's at least what happened for me. It was like, whoa, I just got back 2/3 of my life.
Right. Like, have a podcast. Right?
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things. And like you said, creativity, I stopped painting because I didn't have time. I was
Yep.
always in the kitchen, counting calories, measuring things, making meal plans, running to the store to do something else. But it's to me, it's that freedom.
Hmm.
It's like you've just freed yourself from basically shackles and
Yeah.
you get to live your life.
100%. Absolutely.
And I love that. And I will make sure to get all of your information in the show notes,
Great.
and make sure that people can find you. I really appreciate you being here. I appreciate you being an anti-diet dietitian. That is amazing. I hope that catches on soon, because it's a big part of the self-love movement. I
Yeah.
appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I loved it.